Building Committee update. Greg? Good evening.
Good evening, again,
Again,
still yet.
still evening.
My partner in crime is not here tonight. He's at the charter school, Mr. Elsasser. So since last month's report, it's been another busy month for the building project. We met with the Orleans Finance Committee, and thanks to the Orleans rep, Judith, Ian, and Josh for showing up and bolstering the team. Chris was also there, Giovanna. Tom came in a little bit later, do cleanup batting, but that's good. It went very well. I mean, there's a common theme of questions about the process and where we are, and specifics about how we got there. And I think it went well. We had a lot of information. I went back and forth. The chair of that committee spent an amazing amount of time putting to pen the minutes from the Brewster FinCom meeting. So she sat through and listened to the tape multiple times to get the sense of that meeting. So they built their questions to us based on that. And it went well. There's still a couple of things they want more clarification on. That's fine, and that's what we do. We just keep moving the process forward so people have a comfort level with it. In the interim, the leadership team consists of the superintendent, principal, Kathleen Chingrali, and some other folks met again with the architects in the schematic design phase. That's what we've been doing for the past couple months. And the schematic design phase is to refine and better define the spaces that we are looking to renovate and construct. In that vein, when you first submit the PSR, the public preliminary report, it's just blocks of spaces. This drills down to, okay, the classroom size, the office size, the hallway size, and they reviewed those spaces one at a time, room by room, floor by floor, to basically question the original thought process, which is what this is all about. You refine this thing all the way through. So in the end, that team came up with a total of 2,500 square feet of space reductions throughout campus. Quick example is all offices are now 150 square feet. They were 175, 200, 225, depending on where they were and who's had put the request in. So everybody's office is the same. So that's great. So that saved a bunch of square footage there. So there's little spaces through the whole campus. So that 2,500 square feet is going to be plugged into the next cost estimate, which will be starting soon, and that'll reduce the cost of the project as well. Also, the facilities group met on several occasions with the architect, different engineering groups, to look at the systems, again, to look at refining the systems requests so that we can better capture all the costs we need for the next round of cost estimate. For instance, the heating ventilation engineer came in and proposed a one heating plant system, basically what we have there today, and that was met with no support whatsoever. We said that is too complex, it's too costly, and it puts the campus at risk for having a boiler failure and having to shut the whole school down. So in the end of, after 2.5 hours of other discussions, where there are going to be 3 separate heating systems, and the buildings will be paired up based on their use and their need, so that the heating systems are more tuned to the use that they're going to be heating and cooling, so that they're more efficient, and that way you don't lose the whole campus, and it becomes easier to control because the controls are twisted that one heating system. For instance, A building and B building, they're going to be stuck together. What is now N building and the gymnasium and part of the new administration will be another system, and the new building and what is going to be the black box, the student center will be another system. Again, that was for heating. Same thing we did that for cooling, so that the systems have different requirements, different sizing. For instance, the gymnasium needs a much larger unit to cool, so you don't really want that running to cool off a small classroom wing. So it makes no sense. We did divvy those loads up as well. The other thing is electrical load. We looked at a list of requests for putting things on the emergency generator, because that's what the school has been doing for the last 20-some odd years. There are different requirements. It's a temporary shelter for folks in either winter storm or summer storm. So that also put a load on the generator. If we're going to have cooling, and they're kind of were surprised. We also had asked them to put the cooling on the emergency generator, because sometimes we have, believe it or not, hurricanes in the summertime, and it gets very hot and humid, and if you have no electricity and people need a place to be refreshed, you have to be able to run the air conditioning. So some of those systems will be live on the emergency generator. For that, it's comfortable for folks to be at the high school, because it also serves as a civil function as well. So those are the types of things we've been looking at and working with. We had a meeting with the civil engineering group, as the folks that do the dirt works, septic system, other systems around the campus that you don't see that are the infrastructure, and gave them some requests and some marching orders to look at different systems. They have to have a conversation with the Town of East Hampton Water Department, whomever that is at this point, about a flow test and pressure test for the piping on the campus. If we want to tie in for a fire alarm, fire sprinkling, all that information has to be available, because this next packet of information is much more refined and much more defined, and when we send it up to Boston in December. Landscape architect was there, and we point blank told him he's got way too many trees in the courtyard. This is not a small forest. He had, must have been like 3 dozen trees in that one courtyard. He said, people will be hiding behind trees, so you gotta lighten up a little bit. And maintenance guys there said, it also means a lot of leaves to rake up. Things that we have to look at maintenance issues. We can't make the place more expensive to maintain. So a lot of those things came forward. They all take the information very well, and it's a good back and forth. And that's because we know the building, we know the property, it's ours, and we want certain things to happen, certain feel to it. So all these efforts are, again, to refine and define the project, so that by our last meeting in the second week of December, the building committee will have all its ducks in a row for a submission of a preliminary package on the final schematic design to the school building authority up in Boston. They will take the month of January to review. There'll be some back and forth between the groups, and hopefully on February 12th, they'll be taking the vote to support the project in its final version as to the final budget and their final numbers to how much they're going to supply for a grant to the project. And the whole idea about, as I said, the refined schematic design is to make sure we don't miss anything. We go building by building, system by system, to make sure that what we have put in the PSR doesn't get lost in the shuffle. We all have our favorite things we keep bringing up, and our job is to drive the engineers and architect crazy, because it's our property and we want to make sure they don't forget something. And we continue to beat them up about that, and that's fine. It's a great back and forth. We had our first meeting yesterday, as a matter of fact, almost 3 hours, with the first set of hard copy floor plans, and going over elevations, means what things look like inside, outside, the types of siding, the types of insulation, the types of wall panels, because all those things generate a cost. And you want to make sure you don't forget something, don't miss anything. So for instance, even though we're not going to do this, every building, every ceiling has a drop ceiling system in it, even though that's not going to happen in every place, but we want to make sure we capture the maximum amount of product we need to cover the property. Some of it may end up just being a spray foam insulation from the interior, but we have to look at that product. We said, is it going to deteriorate? Is it going to flake down? I mean, we want to make sure that whatever systems we put in there are going to be durable and aren't going to be a temptation to the students in the future to start poking at it, and kids being what they are. We looked at floor coverings, all kinds of different systems available, and why they're recommending certain floor coverings. Parts of the campus, quite frankly, are going to have just finished concrete or just painted concrete. As you get towards what's called the front of the building, the front of the property, where it's more public-oriented, they're going to be much finer finishes. They showed us some examples of some of the projects they've done in Holbrook, West Bridgewater. So it gives you a flavor of all the projects that are out there, and even to the exterior, looking to cover as much of the exterior as possible. Remember, we're looking to increase the energy efficiency of the envelope, so to make the buildings much more comfortable and easier to heat and cool. So they're looking at all kinds of different systems of wrapping the concrete and extending that so that it looks as it did once upon a time, but it also much more energy efficient. We're also looking at as much possible as saving some of the original siding that cypress siding in some places in pretty good shape. They have an idea of using that on the exterior of the, what's called the flyover, which is a section above the main roof of the auditorium. It'll look like the old campus would from Cable Road, so it's kind of a tie from the old to the new. So we're gonna look at using as much of that as possible. Again, it's across the board systems review to make sure that we haven't forgotten anything and that we're gonna have a robust conversation with MSBA about making sure that we have everything we want, everything we need to make this project go forward. The last thing we had last night was a discussion about construction management at risk. The project manager, principal owner, Mr. Marks, is not available next week. He was only available last night, so we had a discussion with himself and the architect. We were looking for, at one point, an individual from the town of Barnstable as a disinterested third party to talk to us about CMR, but he had since retired, and we had no other contacts to do that. So I said, let's have a conversation within the group, and a lot of questions back and forth about the process, the costs, and the intent to do a CMR project. It's in a nutshell, a way of having another set of eyes and expertise at the table to look at making sure the phasing of the project is more to our liking and potentially saving some money, but that savings, quote unquote, comes at a premium. So you're paying an architect and his engineers, you're paying the OPM and his group, and you'll be paying a third group of individuals to look at the plans and give you some suggestions on how to move the project forward. So, as I promised the towns, we would have that vote by the end of November, which is our last meeting is next week. And true to that, we're gonna have the meeting next Wednesday, and that's when we'll be taking that vote. So if anybody wants to weigh in, that's the time to do so. We haven't had anybody yet say one way or the other. So it'll be whoever's in the room at the time and whatever information we get from whomever between now and the 20th, that's how we'll make that decision. Let's see. And lastly, I need to reiterate that next Tuesday, Mr. McCarthy, the Executive Director of MSBA, will be on campus in the auditorium starting at 6 p.m. We are urging everybody to show up and listen to Mr. McCarthy. He runs a very good operation, $200+ million a year. There are 700 projects in the pipeline. I mean, it's an unbelievable projects, the work that he does with that group up in Boston. He's very good about explaining things to folks, and he will be available to have a discussion with us and answer some questions, and hopefully he'll put some folks' misgivings at rest, but mostly he wants to explain how we become partners and what that partnership means. And it's very important that people understand that the state agency is a very valuable partner in all this. They have a lot of requirements, a lot of paperwork, but that's fine. It's served everybody well all through the Commonwealth. So that's where we are with regards to the project. I don't think I forgot anything. The last thing is that review of the plans I mentioned. As you go through the floor plans, some of the rooms have, of their, not on purpose, but of their own volition, if you will, shrunk a little bit by 25 or 35 square feet as you try to move a mechanical system into place. The room adjacent to it may give up a few square feet, so you have enough room for the technician to walk around. So, and in some cases, a 950 square foot classroom is down to 950 or, excuse me, 925 or 900, things of that nature, just to make sure that there's room to do all this stuff that we need to do without increasing the square footage. Again, we are, at this point, less than 220,000 square feet. I said, up front that we reduced it by 2,500, but there is a couple of calculations that go into that 2,500 square feet, so it's closer to 4,000 square feet by the time you're done, and the cost per square foot, so the budget will be reduced by that. So the last part is that starting next Tuesday, the 19th, the architect and their cost estimator, which is a separate firm, and the project manager who used to be, or main job they used to do was cost estimating, they both prepare a cost estimate based on the direction we've given them so far in the schematic design review. It takes about 2 weeks, and then they have basically a conference, and they bandy about back and forth as to what number, how you get to your number, how we get to my number, and they come up with a plan to present to us. so that we would have by the middle of December, an updated cost estimate. That would be the document that we'd be submitting to Boston at the end of December and discuss with them in January. I think I got all of it so far.
Good. Are there any questions for Greg? Yes, Dick?
Greg, you mentioned a vote that your committee's taking, I think you said next week.
Yes, next Wednesday.
What is the vote that is being taken?
Well, there's a lot of votes. The most important one is construction management at risk. If you remember back in June, we had a discussion in the library in Eastham about presenting the concept to folks. And that's a different way of doing a building project that Massachusetts and MSBA has allowed for the last 10 years. And it was suggested that we look at it, and that's what we're doing.
And there were two options for proceeding with that.
Yes, there's a construction management at risk, or what's called design, bid, build, which is what is most familiar with folks on the Cape. There's, to my knowledge, never been a CMR project down here. For instance, Cape Cod Tech is a design, bid, build. The library's design, bid, build. I mean, you put a set of plans together, and you put the specifications and make sure they're as complete as possible. You put it on the street for contractors to come and bid at, and they look at the plans and specifications, and that's what they bid on, and that's what you build based on that design.
But your committee's recommending the other approach, correct?
We're not recommending, we have discussed it, we haven't voted anything yet. That's what the vote is next week,
Oh, I see. Where's that going to be?
at the high school. Same,
Okay.
same classroom, and if we have a bigger crowd, we'll have to move someplace else, but right now, it'll be in N Building Room 105, if I remember right.
Chris, I have another question.
Yes, please, Dick?
I want, did your committee, your whole committee speak to the Orleans FinCom the other day when you said you had your meeting in Orleans?
It was myself and Chris and Giovanna and Tom.
Okay.
And Josh got up and spoke at one point.
good.
It was a bunch of questions back and forth. Yeah, so it's generally the same team that presents everything, so the message is consistent and constant, and we're familiar with the subject matter.
Did you get challenged by their FinCom on the state numbers on student enrollments and projected enrollments into the future?
Yes.
Do you feel you're able to answer them to their satisfaction?
Yes, I leave that to Tom and Chris. I mean, I keep telling you folks, that's above my pay grade. I don't touch those questions at all. That's not my job. I'm working for you as a building committee chair. Those are policy discussions that came long before I was involved.
Okay. Well, then I'll ask them the balance of my questions.
Okay, thank you.
Are you relieved at that?
No, it doesn't bother me at all. I just,
Are there any other questions for Greg? Yes, Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The construction at risk management, explain again in layman's term in 2 sentences what that is.
okay. In layman's terms, in 2 sentences, it's hiring, it's pre-selecting a general contractor prior to designing the project, so that the contractor is at the table with the architect and the engineers and advising them on a potentially different path or a better path of what to design for the project. So you have someone that's actually building things. That's the end of my 2 sentences. My explanation is, you actually have somebody who builds things, the carpenter, plumber, that type of person, explaining to the folks who design things that that looks good on paper, but in the real world, I can't connect the pipe that close. So it's a matter of bricks and mortar versus ideas and computer-generated design.
And how does that work in the design and build?
Design, bid, build is basically you have the same engineers for the architect and the same review folks for the project manager. They design the project, they drop the specifications, they have a thought process in mind as to how the project would be built, and they put that into a volume of books that is the specifications for the project. And that goes out to bid through the mass bidding laws, and you take, for want of a better description, they're all qualified bidders because they have to go through state, what's called DCAM, Department of Capital Asset Management, certification to bid on these projects because they're, for a certain size project. But from that group, you have to end up taking the lowest bidder unless there's an exception to that bidder and they have a problem with some of the issues, there's something wrong with their bid. Then you can take the next highest bidder, but you have to take them in order of smallest to highest.
So does this eliminate the change order process?
Absolutely not.
Okay,
There are change orders in both scenarios.
scenarios.
Yep.
And to buy this feature, to get the contractor to the table now, rather than a year from now, is $5 million.
There are 3 line items in the cost estimate that total $5.8 million, 5.9. There's a contingency for the construction management at risk. There's a fee for construction management at risk, and there's an insurance line item. There are 3 line items that tally 5.8 plus. On top of the fees we'd be paying the architect and his engineers and the project manager.
And in addition to the 5.8 million in the June meeting or subsequent, I think I heard somebody explain that CRM only covers 50% of the trades actually doing the work, that the design-build process still applies to a good portion of the project.
It's
Is that-
a hybrid, yes.
It's like a 50/50.
Yes. But the trades that the CMR oversees and brings to the table are pre-qualified to work with that general contractor. So he pre-selects the best person that he thinks, the best group he thinks can do the job for them or for us.
Jim, does that answer your questions, or you have more?
I gotta ponder this one.
Are there any other questions for Greg?
Just one.
I'm sorry, yes.
Greg,
Ian?
just one. Has the MSBA or the project manager or the architect weighed in on either side of the fence, CMR?
The discussion last night was with the project manager and the architect,
Yeah,
and they're both requesting that we do CMR.
okay. And the MSBA, do they want,
MSBA doesn't really get involved officially.
they offer
They,
any?
they have the, they offer both, and it's up to the local group to decide what they want to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Josh?
Yeah, one quick question, I think. Just going back to the reduction in square footage.
Yep.
And I know you had mentioned shrinking of offices to try to get things equal. I'm wondering what the driving factors of trying to reduce size was.
Well,
Is it as simple as cost, or is it?
Oh, no, it's more than cost. It's basically, as I said, looking at, starting last year, you're looking at, like, from 30,000 square feet, a Google map of the property.
Yeah.
So you get blobs of spaces. And it's not until this point where this schematic design, where, as I say, you have floor plans, and you have rooms, and you say, okay, this is the math wing, and that's the math department head's office. Gee, it's not the same size as the one over in English or foreign languages. So, having done this before, it's like turf wars. So to avoid some of the turf wars, you say, okay, make the management decision that every office is the same, principal, vice principal, athletic director, secretary, you pick one. They're all the same. So you can't have a conversation about, my office is bigger than yours, because that's all gone. So it's not communistic, but it's more egalitarian, if you will.
Are there any communal office spaces at all, or have we designed mostly?
Oh, no, there are definitely
individual-
somewhat what I call the breakout spaces, spaces for teachers to collaborate.
Yeah.
And those all end up being the same square footage. And I'll use a quick example, Josh. When they first came to us about reducing square footage, I looked across the room at Tom at the time, and they were looking to reduce the wood shop and the metalworking shop by 250 square feet each. I was the first one to raise the objection. I said, absolutely not, until you prove to me by taking that square footage out, it doesn't become a safety issue.
Yeah.
So they went back and they basically took a table saw that you want to cut a piece of plywood, so you need the saw, you need 8 feet in front, 8 feet in back, and they realized that they can't reduce those spaces. So that's where the impetus was, okay, let's look at other places that make more sense, away from the teaching stations, to reduce square footage that nobody really pays attention to or notices. Keep in mind that office spaces, MSBA pays 0 reimbursement. So all those offices are on our nickel. So anytime you can reduce something, it comes off our tab. And that's the second driving force. It's all about compromising, and yes, of course, everything has to come back to the bottom line.
Yeah, so would it be fair to say it was more of a, due to some design refinement versus, hey, we need to lose,
Yep, absolutely. Design refinement, absolutely. You got it perfect. Thank
The
you.
process we're in.
thank you.
I'll be real quick. Greg, you said the towns have not offered any input on this?
On the CMR, I haven't heard one thought from anybody. I had a quick conversation a month ago with Mr. Kelly from Orleans, and he said, I don't have any experience. I have no idea at CMR. He says, I can't give you one way or the other. He's only done design, bid, build. So he didn't want to weigh in on something he was completely unfamiliar with. I thanked him very much for his conversation, but that's the only one I know of.
2 comments. Does the building committee feel expert enough to answer this question? This is a $6 million question. That's 5% of the project we're talking about.
Well, I'm not expert, but, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we are entrusted with making these decisions, Jim. I mean, it's pretty much all across the board that
Oh, I get it.
the buck stops with us, let's face it. So we try to get as much information as possible and get a comfort level with it. And the reason I didn't push for the vote last night is we had 4 or 5 members who weren't able to be there. So I'm giving folks an extra week to get their calendars ready, so we have as many folks in the room to make the decision.
Yeah, no, I understand that, Greg. I just, a group of you have gone to all 4 towns now. You have faced a ton of questions about this project. We've seen the shock waves go through our community with the price tag. And the fact that we're silent on one of the biggest ticket items of the project at 5.8 and no direction really puts an onus on, we have 18 building, I think it's 18 now, building committee members, maybe off by a person or 2, so forgive me, but 12 of the 18 get paychecks from Nauset District, and 6 do not, and are on the committee for varying expert reasons. And we're asking this group of educators largely to make a $6 million decision without input that we sought from the same people who are asking us all the questions. Somebody should be doing something. I'm glad I'm not at that table, because whatever the decision is, you're going to have to justify that decision, $6 million, up or down to the taxpayers of our 4 towns. Could be one of the most significant decisions you make. That's just this person's feelings anyways.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, Judy?
Okay, I have a very mundane question.
No.
Because I do.
Okay.
I know nothing about building,
Okay.
other than remodeling my own house, but the building part of it I know nothing about. So I know you've probably said this before, and I understand that for $5 million, we're getting the builders at the table earlier than normal. But what does that really get us? I don't know. I truly don't know.
And that is, the conundrum, quite frankly. I mean, the 2 people I said, the project manager and the architect, want the extra set of eyes there.
But that's not costing them any money.
No, they get the same amount no matter what.
Yeah, so take those people aside, because they're not putting any money up.
Right.
So, to me, can't they tell us why this is worth $5.8 million?
They obviously tried to do that last night, giving us some reasons why they prefer to have this system in place, in the sense of having.
No, wait. I'm sorry, but they didn't tell us they preferred that. Pardon me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Okay.
I asked them specifically, and they grudgingly told us what they thought should happen.
Right.
So it wasn't, their presentation wasn't, we should go this way. Their presentation was the insides and outsides of it. I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's okay.
But so far, nobody has really been able to explain why this is worth $5.8 million.
Other than, as I just explained, the two professionals asking that we consider it and consider it favorably. No, I mean, part of the process whenever we went someplace, either boards of selectmen or FinComs, I made a point of asking them, do you have any guidance for us? We did ask you a question back in June, and I haven't heard any response since, so, whatever decision we make next week, we'll make the decision, and everybody's gonna have to live with it and move on from there.
And when is this meeting next week?
Next Wednesday, the 20th, starting at 5:30.
Normal building committee meeting at the high school.
I don't know, because I'm not, Wednesday,
The 20th,
6 PM. Oh, I'm sorry, 5:30.
5:30.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, Robert, pardon me.
First off, thank you for all the hard work you've done. I definitely think, judging from some of the other questions coming up here, maybe we could look at some of the other design, bid, build projects and say, oh, because they didn't do a CMR, they had an additional 6 months of construction, or, I mean, again, I'm not, there's some kind of like additional cost, or, hey, they cut the wood room before we even thought about safety.
I think that's again, that's the crux of the issue. Unless you were able to, and this may sound ridiculous, but if you had two projects exactly the same, two Nauset high schools, and you were doing the same thing, you did one design bid build and one on CMR, and at the end of the process, you looked at how things turned out, that would be your aha moment as to what the pluses or minuses are of each one. But once you get on the path of picking one or the other, you don't really know what you've left behind or what you could have been on the receiving end of. I mean, it's an unknown. And that's why it's a difficult decision for some folks to go down that path.
But in your discussion with other people who've done other, like the library projects, for example, no one was like, hey, just so you know, we wish we had done,
To my knowledge, the library it wasn't a large enough project to do construction management at risk.
Okay.
There's a certain threshold that comes into play, and I believe it's only schools anyway that have CMR available to them, because that's under the MSBA auspices that this works. That may be
Other-
one of the questions next week for Mr. McCarthy, quite frankly, but we'll see.
Other questions for, yes, Jim? Is that you?
I have a practical question. If 5 of us show up next Wednesday, are we going to be allowed to stay in the meeting room to hear the discussion and the vote?
Yeah, it's an open meeting, certainly. Certainly.
But we'll have a quorum of the school committee in an unposted meeting.
It's not your meeting, you're not in the meeting, it's not your meeting, you're just observing.
You wouldn't be deliberating, so you may be opining, but that's not deliberation. You wouldn't be taking any official action. So there's already 2 members on the committee. You can run it by council if you,
I'll show up, I'm just asking.
you can run it by council if you want.
It's not breaking any rules, no.
Good.
Sorry, other questions for Greg? A couple points, I'm sorry, at the end I'd like to bring up. I think first off, when we discussed last night, we asked Richard, our OPM, the cost, and he said 4 million. So not 5.5 million. It was 4 million, he said, would be more the cost of what CMR at risk would bring to us. One of the other reasons and logics for CMR at risk going that route is that almost any remodel project that's done in a school is done CMR at risk. And the reason for that is because you've got students in the environment at the same time you've got construction going on. And the concept is that it works better if you have the construction company on earlier than beyond. So that was one of the other ones. The other thought process was is that it could save time, and i.e., if you save time, you save money on the project. So if you have them there and you speed up, our current set is we're running roughly a 3 to 4 year range for construction. If we could save some time from that, it would cut costs and also just cut distribution to or disruption of education. But the biggest point I think that they made last night was that if we did a design bid build, we would most likely only have 2 to 3 firms that would apply to do the job. If we did CMR at risk, we would bring in a whole new scale of construction companies that would be willing to bid on the job. And we're looking more in the 6 to 8 range. And the companies that are added to the table at that point are the big ones. I mean, the Suffolks, the huge companies that come out of Boston. Not that I'm not saying that's a good thing, but having more people bidding is a good thing. And having more people at the table and interested in the project is a good thing. So that was some of the logic that went behind going CMR at risk. And because we're not just one building that's getting remodeled, but we are a bunch of buildings that will be remodeled, and some new construction also, it's a fairly complex process. And so I believe that the motivation behind the OPM as well as the architect, they weren't presenting one way or the other. I pushed them in the end, asked them if this was your building and these were your kids, what would you do? And they said they thought CMR at risk was the way to go. In turn, if you look at the state website of the MSBA, you can tell what projects are done how, and almost any project above $100 million in the state now is CMR at risk. So I don't know. The thing is, we don't have a ton of experience building schools, but you go to towns off the Cape, a Belmont, which is in the process of doing one, and they've got a bunch of different schools that they have to maintain and build on a regular basis, and almost everyone over 100 million is doing CMR at risk. So there has to be something that they know when they're in this process. They're not looking to give money away. I mean, it's just they must have a better outcome in the process. So I realize the positioning that it's difficult to comprehend that spending $4 million more on a project is a hard sell. But if the quality of the project and the timing of the project improve as a result, then it is maybe money well spent. So that will be decided later on at the next meeting. Excellent. Some other questions? Greg?
Okay,
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Greg.
We move on next to